So in October 2007, we did our first event. We took about 6 months to put it together, and we wound up really doing pretty well. 200 attendees, 6 tracks, really a stunning success to me. Really exceeded my expectations on what I thought was likely on the first event. So that was big, right? It's a big win to have this idea. Go do it, but it's only one. So the question is can you do it someplace else? So my friends Pam Shaw and Wes Doobie run the Tampa user group. They came to the Orlando event, participated, and they just absolutely loved the idea because they saw the way there's a synergy with chapters. One of the nice things that I tell people about this event is it really does 2 things. One is it's a membership drive. There's probably some people in this room who had not heard of the local user group or heard of PASS until they found out about sql-saturday. So it's a great way to boost the size of your mailing list. The other part is it actually becomes a membership fundraiser, right? Instead of having a car wash to raise some funds, what you hope is at the end of the day, maybe a $500 extra, and you use that to pay for pizza or maybe fly in a speaker. So they did their event in January 2008, and right away we learned that our dream was built on a shaky foundation. Right, our website tools were very much just thrown together for the first event. We didn't know what we needed. We didn't have enough documentation. We didn't have a way to really collect money evenly. And so it made it very painful for them as event leaders to get through that because they had to call me and say, would you change this or would you help us do that? So we saw right away we've got to invest some time in this, kind of smooth out the logistics. But the last point there is that the big thing I learned is if you look at all of the events, the ones that are most successful, they're the ones that had a powerful leader. And powerful leaders, kind of by self-selection, tend to step up and say, I want to do this. But one of the lessons we learned out about it is we don't want a lot of rules. Rules hold entrepreneurial people back. So maybe I've got it someplace else in here, but the rules we essentially have is attendance has to be free. You can charge for lunch. We'll talk about that in a minute. But attendance has to be free, and you prefer local speakers. Other than that, do what you want. We make a lot of suggestions, but we let people do what they want to do. So we learned a lot of stuff around that, a lot of pain points, and then we finally got to the lunch part. So Peter's done a great job fundraising here, and a lot of that depends on where you're at and how good you are at fundraising. How many people here like asking for money? Right? It's Peter. It's not an easy skill to learn. So what we needed was, what do we do when, for example, we had one in Greenville, South Carolina about a year and a half ago, and they were targeting about 75 attendees. The problem is the big sponsors don't want to fly somebody in for 75 attendees. It's not cost effective. So how do they come up with funding? So we go back and forth, and it's really a challenge because if you start charging for the event, it changes the whole flavor, the expectations, right? Part of it is we've got this building here donated. Microsoft lends us the space. If they see us charging people to come in, then they go, well, we want our share, and the costs go up. And the speakers go, well, wait a minute, you're making money. Why don't I get paid? So it's really important for the event to stay free. We worked out the compromise to charge for lunch for the events that thought they needed the additional funding, and I think that really is going to start to give us scalability way beyond what the code camps could do, because I think everybody realizes that $10 for lunch is fairly reasonable. It's about the same as going out, and it makes the event possible. So the thing that I didn't understand in the beginning, and I like to think of myself as forward thinking, is that the biggest thing that this was going to do was cause an explosion in the speaker pool. If you were a speaker or wanted to be a speaker 2.5 years ago, where did you go to get better? Basically, you went to your local chapter, and then after that, your choices were to drive a couple hours to the nearest chapter or maybe go to a code camp. So if you were trying to work your way up to the PASS Summit to be a national level speaker, you didn't have a place to learn. So we have greatly changed that formula unintentionally, where we now have hundreds of speakers more than we had 2.5 years ago. So I'm not good with charts. I probably should have done one here, but I wanted to show you the impact. So since we started back in May of 2007, we've had 12,000 people registered for a sql-saturday. 1,400 sessions, 350 speakers, 897 people volunteered to do something. Do registration, pick up the bananas for breakfast, do something. And I think that gives you some idea of the level of community involvement. And I would have just never guessed back then that we would get to those kinds of numbers. So it's a pleasant surprise. So then we got to the hard part. We had successfully built the franchise, but the problem is we had a different scaling problem, and that was my time. I have a full-time job just like the rest of you, and Yet, for every one of these events, I spend time on the phone coaching, helping them learn how to deal with sponsors, setting up the event, doing a lot of stuff. And we were at the point where we were going to have to make some changes in order to scale that. But we'd also got to the point where we felt like the formula was pretty well set. So in November, I talked to Rusabh, and we finally worked out the details to turn over sql-saturday to the HAS. And while that seems obvious, and I think it is an obvious thing, it's a big decision for Rusabh because it's going to take a lot of time from our full-time staff to support this. So right now, we're in the middle of that transition. Blythe is here in the back. Blythe, raise your hand. Blythe from Bassett Jordan. So she's here to try to absorb the formula, right? Because you can talk about this on paper, but you have to kind of be here and see the community interact and understand what we're trying to achieve. So we've got this done. We're in the middle of the transition, and that's going to take another few months. A lot of people ask me, how's the transition going to work? What's going to change? Our goal is for nothing to change in a negative way, right? Anytime you do an acquisition, there's pain, right? We're going through a little bit of pain, growing pains, but we're going to come out the other side in a much better place. All right, and I think my last slide. So we're going to turn this over to Rusabh in a minute. He's going to talk to you about what he wants to do from the past side, but here's what I hope happens, and not handing this off to Rusabh. I think we can do 80+ events a year in the US alone. And that sounds like an aggressive number when you realize we're doing 5 a year in Florida alone. So, and I think about the impact that it's going to have on the speaker pool and the competition we're going to have to get at the summit, and that is really exciting. I also want to see this come to smaller cities. I love events and I'm competitive. I want to have more people than Peter and more sponsors than Peter, right? You guys get that, right? But I like the idea that we can have an event coming up next year in Melbourne, Florida, where we're going to shoot for probably 50 attendees, right? It doesn't just have to be big cities. So I want to keep growing the local speakers, and the one thing that I haven't done a good job at, and I'm still trying to figure out, is we have to do better about networking. This is a challenge for us at the summit, but as we've gotten better at it, the summit has become absolutely as much a social event within the SQL community as it is a technical event, and that makes people want to go back and it adds to your value. But we haven't gotten good at making this a social event today. So before I hand off the microphone to Rusabh, I would just challenge you that while you're here today, remember that none of us are very good at starting conversations, but we're usually pretty good at talking once we get going. So take the time to meet somebody new today, and I promise you when you go home and you tell your spouse about it, you'll tell them you have a better time because you did. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Thank you everyone for being here. So Peter invited me. He sent me a personal note about a month and a half back saying, will you come to this event? And I was like, absolutely, I would love to. This is my 5th SQL Saturday that I've been to. I love what Andy and Steve and Vlad Knight have done for this event. And I'm actually excited about what we as PAS will be able to do with this event. One of our biggest challenges right now is making sure that we keep the flavor of the event as is, which is grassroots. It has to be owned by the local community. Anything that's owned by a large organization, be it PAS or anything else, has not that great a chance of success because now you have a lot more bureaucracy. So we are trying to make sure that what we do and how we take over these events will keep it grassroots, will promote local volunteers, make sure that they have the tools and the support that they need to grow these events. And hopefully, we'll get to the numbers that Andy talks about. But one of the things I learned from this keynote is I'm going to keep Steve as a close advisor. So anytime he tells me it's a bad idea, I need to move forward with that. But thank you everyone for coming, and I really want to thank Peter and all the volunteers who have organized this event and put in countless number of hours. The number of emails they have seen on that, it's just amazing.
Pose for some pictures.
Right. That's my keychain.